I want to talk to you a little bit about the whole issue of evil and how evil is actually an argument for God. You know, many people will challenge the Christian faith by saying something like this: how can a good God allow evil and suffering? And oftentimes Christians seem somewhat stymied in being able to answer that question. Really, there's only three responses to the issue of evil, and they really represent three different worldviews. There's the worldview of naturalism, and that is all that is natural material stuff. Biochemical interaction. There's no God, there's no ultimate reality, there's no transcendent truth. Everything is a product of random chance, and the only thing that is actually ultimate is just the stuff of this material universe. And within the worldview of naturalism, basically evil just is a reality that you can't do anything about. Life sucks and then you die. In fact, even calling it evil is somewhat of an interesting dilemma, because that includes some sense of moral absolute to judge evil from good, and within the worldview of naturalism there is no sense of moral absolute, so you can't even call evil evil. It's just something that maybe you personally don't like. There's another understanding of evil, and that's within the worldview of transcendentalism. That's kind of Eastern mysticism, or what's known as pantheism, or in philosophy what's known as monism, and that's the oneness of all things. And in that worldview, evil isn't evil. It's just an appearance or an impression, because what is ultimately real is the psychic spiritual stuff that kind of ties everybody together. And in a religious expression of that, that's the fact that we're all God, or the godhood within each of us, and through the law of karma we can, through reincarnation, become the God that we already are. So our perception of evil is really just an illusion. So evil isn't really evil in the worldview of pantheism or transcendentalism. And then there's a third worldview, which is a worldview of theism that's represented within biblical Christianity, biblical Judaism, and Islam. And in those worldviews, there is an ultimate God who has established his moral law, and evil is a reality. And in particular, within the worldview of biblical Christianity, evil is the absence of good. Evil is a violation of God's will in the universe. And evil is something that God allows, in fact uses for his purposes, but one day will eliminate, because according to the worldview of the Bible, in biblical Christianity, God is going to triumph over evil and one day completely eradicate evil. Now, there are people who don't necessarily appreciate that perspective and don't agree with that perspective, but when I get into dialogue with them, they say it almost challengingly, kind of like, how can you believe in a God who allows evil and suffering? And so what I try to do is, more kind of even out the intellectual playing field and somewhat dispassionately kind of say and explain, well, there's basically three views. And once you understand that, you may not agree with the Christian worldview or the Christian answer of evil, but by doing so you default to one of the other views. And so, as you're kind of listening to this, that's what I would say to you. If you don't believe in the biblical perspective on evil and suffering, be aware that you can't just reject that and smugly live in some kind of world of agnosticism. By rejecting the Christian worldview, you by default either embrace the worldview of naturalism or the worldview of transcendentalism. But see, the worldview of Christianity in response to the whole issue of evil is that evil exists because of man's sin. Man rebelled against God, and sin has affected not only human nature, it's affected the entire world system. And we live in a fallen world with fallen people, and we live in a world system where natural disasters and earthquakes and terrible things happen. We live in a world where our bodies are affected by sin, and so disease and cancer happens. We live in a world where our hearts, our nature, are affected by sin, so divorce and murder and child abuse happens. You see, evil happens in the world because of the moral decisions of moral creatures to rebel against God. But there's coming a time when God is going to eradicate evil. In fact, God has already done something about evil, in that he sent Jesus Christ to pay the penalty for our sins. He lived a righteous and holy life. He's the Son of God. He paid the penalty to die in our place on the cross. He rose again from the dead, triumphing over death and sin and evil. He's coming back again one day, and he will eradicate all evil. And right now, people who trust him have their sins forgiven, receive his resurrection life into themselves, and they have the power to overcome evil within themselves and the power to be an influence with God's love and grace affecting an evil society around them till one day when Jesus comes back again, evil is judged, evil is eliminated, and his righteousness and love reigns forever and ever. That's the Christian response to the whole issue of evil and suffering. You may accept it, you may reject it, but realize if you reject it, it means that you're only accepting the explanation of naturalism or the explanation of transcendentalism. And I think those explanations are far more bankrupt and filled with both logical and existential difficulties than the truth, which is that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through him. And in this life there is evil, but through Christ evil can be triumphed, and evil will be eradicated through the reign of Jesus Christ.